good news is that John will be back next Sunday, so you only have to hear this once from me, or you only have to hear from me once. I kind of feel like, the last two times that I spoke is military related. This one's military related. That's really all I know. I'll just throw that out there right now. So I apologize to anybody who doesn't like hearing about military related stuff. I don't really know a whole lot else. I was born and raised in the Air Force. My dad joined the Air Force a month before I was born. Both my grandparents served. Well, both my grandfathers served. And my senior year of high school, I knew that I didn't want anything to do with college, and told my parents that I wanted to enlist in the Army. And they told me that I was nuts and that I had to go to college. So I did, and proceeded in proving to them that I didn't deserve to be in college. And then I enlisted anyhow. For those of you who don't really know a whole lot about me, that gives you a little bit of a clue. I spent 4 years in the Army, and some very interesting times, and now I am in the Air Force, very interesting times as well. So what I'm going to do is kind of relate what I've learned about the values they instill in you within the military, and try to correlate that to the values that are instilled in us as Christians. So we're going to look at our core values, both from a military perspective as well as from a Christian perspective. When you first enlist, and what I've got up here is the oath of enlistment, and that's the promise that we as military members make when you enlist. And when in 2000, when I enlisted by saying, I, Neale Linge, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. So those of you who haven't seen this before, this is what everybody raises their right hand and swears to. And what's that mean for us? There's a graduation picture from basic training down in Lackland Air Force Base. What's our military promise? What's it mean to us as a country? What's it mean to the military members? You're swearing that you're there to support and defend the Constitution, that you are going to do whatever it takes, whether it's leaving your family. I didn't realize what that meant when I swore the oath as a 20-year-old kid. Like I said, I did that whole college thing and kind of threw me off the normal 18-year-old kid gap. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time until I got to Fort Hood, showed up, and everybody was out in the field. And they were coming back in from the field. They've been doing a field exercise, and 4 o'clock came, and 5 o'clock came, and 6 o'clock, and at 10:30 they rolled back in from the field. And I'm sitting there exhausted, nervous, because I didn't even know who my NCO, my platoon sergeant, was going to be or anything like that. But I knew I just had to keep waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally I got home around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning that night. And then the next day had to be back in at 05. Everything has a 0 in front of it. And I had to be back in that next morning. And they're like, oh yeah, well, you need to make sure you get in processed and get everything taken care of, because in 2 weeks we're deploying. We're going out to the National Training Center in California. And we're going to be out there for 6 weeks, and get all your stuff in order. And so I don't even know what my stuff is. I don't even know how to get it in order. But that's what I had to do to support and defend the Constitution. I had to get ready to do whatever was asked of me, whether it was staying until 10:30 at night or going out to the National Training Center and getting yelled at for 6 weeks. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was out there to support the unit. We're supposed to remain true and faithful, both to the Constitution, but also to everybody that we work with, everybody that we are there to support, everybody that we are there to defend. We're supposed to be true and faithful to you as U.S. citizens, as our people that we've elected to serve. We're supposed to be true and faithful to that Constitution, to all the officers and appointed officials over us. whether we agree with their decisions or not. And let's face it, a lot of us have disagreed with a lot of decisions that have been made over the past 200 plus years in this country. But that's not our choice. We don't get to decide. We swore an oath that we're going to obey all lawful orders, that we're going to be true and faithful to everybody appointed over us and obey those orders as long as they're lawful orders, because we are held accountable by the rules and regulations, by the regulations in the Army, by the AFIs, Air Force Instructions. That's just our acronym for, or our term for regulations, because it sounds nicer. What it all comes down to is the oath of enlistment is that point where somebody raises their right hand and says that I'm willing and that I intend to set aside who I am as an individual. All of my past history, all of my past desires, set aside that individualism for the sake of a team, for the sake of a nation, for the sake of something better than just one person's desires or one person's intent. And that's essentially what that oath comes down to. We're setting aside one person for a nation, for a country. Okay, so how do we become military? It involves a lot of people like that in all branches. We show up, and the whole point of basic training is to break down the I, break down the individualistic mindset, break you away from everything that you've been taught since you were a little kid when you first said the word I or me as a 1-year-old or less than 1-year-old, and get you out of that idea of it's all about me. It's all about number one. I've got to take care of number one. That's been instilled in us as Americans since we were less than a year old. And the first point of basic training is that you don't matter. And they're very, very clear on the fact that you don't matter. You have people who, actually in the Army, they don't point. They do a lot of this, a lot of like open-handed. So you're very aware of the fact that that hand is close to your face, which intimidates you, and you're pretty sure you're going to get smacked. But you're coming from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different areas. I had people in basic training with me who literally came from, Compton, South Central LA, from cornfields of Iowa, from, the projects of New York City and Cleveland, me from the suburbs of Colorado Springs at the time. You have a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different baggage that people are bringing with them. I had a guy who was in basic training with me, and the entire point behind him joining the military was because his wife had gotten shot in a drive-by and was disabled, and he didn't have any medical insurance. And so that was the only way he had to ensure that he was going to have a steady paycheck and medical insurance to make sure she was taken care of. Well, what they do is say, you know what, I realize that about you, but I don't care, because it's not about you. It's about this team. So you have your first week or 2 weeks, depending on which branch it is and how long the basic training is, where they break down you. You are no longer, Neale Linge. You're no longer Tim Renfro. You are just private, or airman, or sailor, or Marine. Actually, it's not often that you get called any of those. It's a lot of other derogatory terms that you're called, scumbag, stuff like that, where they're teaching you that you don't matter, that it's not all about you. And those, we'll call those Hades week, but you can get the gist of what they normally call it. And nothing you do is right. Your boots, you could look at them and see your reflection and shave by it, and that's still not good enough. You could bounce a quarter off of your bed because you've got your hospital corners tight enough, and they're going to want to be able to bounce $1 off of it, which doesn't work. And that's really what they're looking for, is to teach you that no matter what you do as an individual, it doesn't matter, because it's not all about you. It's about building the we mentality, building the team mentality. There's no I in team, all of that type of thinking. Building a team mentality based on the same common set of beliefs, values, ethics, all of that. Because of that baggage and that background that they don't know about or care about, they have to get away from that. They have to get away from, whether you're coming from a cornfield, literally in some cases, whether you showed up. I had another guy, my friend John, who showed up, literally, he didn't have any toiletries, he didn't have any tennis shoes, nothing. He had the clothes that he was wearing because he had just come off the streets He didn't have a home. He literally was living in a cardboard box and used a fake address so that he could enlist. And they're trying to get away from that. They're trying to build a common set of beliefs because they don't know what your beliefs are. They don't care what they were. They need you to believe the same thing as everybody else. That doesn't mean that your faith doesn't matter. That means that they don't know whether you even had any ethics to begin with. They don't know whether you came from a gang life or any of that. They need to start at square one. And that's why they have to break down the individual and build a common team, a common goal, and a common set of beliefs. And the whole way you do that, and what we have down here is I just forgot the guy's name. I think it's the Truman method of team building and team mentality and how you build the team idea within individuals. And what you have beginning with is forming. You have a whole bunch of different individuals that you throw into one group, and they form together based on just that natural instinct to please those around you. And you immediately want to be accepted. You immediately want to give into that somewhat peer pressure, and you have that desire that people will like you, for the most part. That works for probably 95% of the people out there. What happens then is you spend a little bit of time forming, and then you develop into storming. And that's where you realize that you don't really care what that other person thinks, because what they want is different from what you want. They want to be number one, and you want to be number one. Or they want to, sleep to the very last second and not make their bed, but you know that the drill sergeant is going to come in and just, verbally kick you in the teeth if everybody's not on the same page and everybody's bunk bed isn't made properly, etc. And the reason I have this picture here, which is very blurry, is that's actually me, my friend Justin, and my friend Zach. And we were the embodiment of this method because I came into the unit and I wanted everybody to like me. And then Justin, the small guy in the middle, he just wanted to pick on me because I was the new guy, which wasn't smart because he was smaller than me. And so we had a lot of storming happen. And it wasn't until we deployed to Iraq in 2003 that we started to go from storming and those personal differences and just butting heads like a couple of rams that we began to start to norm and to realize that, hey, if I want to get through this and you want to get through this, we better stop trying to kill each other and try to defend each other against everybody else who's trying to kill us. And that's really where, Courtney and I just went and visited him in New Orleans back in August, because that's how good of friends we became, because we went through all of that together. We went through the forming, the storming, the norming, and then we got to the point where if there was a raid, and our platoon did a lot of raids while we were in Iraq, I didn't want anybody else on that four-man stack other than these two guys. And obviously it's a four-man stack, so I had to have somebody else. But they were usually behind me because I knew that I could rely on both of them. And so when I would go up, and I was the door kicker, because I was the biggest guy who wasn't an NCO, and you never want your NCOs to get taken out. So you pick the biggest guy who's not one, and then you throw him the sledgehammer or the ramming device or his foot, and you throw him at the door first. And you know what? Those guys always went through that door with me. And I was grateful because we'd been through all of that. And it's time to move on. Because all of this had been instilled in us. Every branch in the military has its core values, has something that it tries to break down that individual and instill one set of beliefs. Yes, you can be a Christian, you can be a Buddhist, you can be Jewish, you can be, Muslim, whatever. But these are the beliefs that they want you to hold on to based on their branch. So in the Army, you had leadership model, or the leadership device there, which is loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. And that's what they want you to embody as a soldier. That's what they want you to take to heart, that you're going to live by all of these things. For the Navy and the Marines, it's honor, courage, and commitment. And we always hear Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis with the Marine Corps, because they want them to remain always faithful to these values. And in the Air Force, it's integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. These are the things that they expect you to live your life by. And when we hear about stories of, some soldier going off the deep end about something, or, getting himself in trouble, when we hear about a Marine who shoots a bunch of innocent Afghan, nationals, one, that indicates to me that there's something else going on there. But two, what the military typically looks at is whether they've embodied these things, whether they've truly taken them to heart. And that's what's going to differentiate your true soldier, sailor, airman, Marine from the people who are a lot of times getting in trouble, from the people who don't move up the ranks or don't promote or don't perform, is whether they've embodied this. And I'm not making a judgment call on anybody on whether they've been promoted or not, because that's not the telltale sign of a true soldier or a true airman. It's based on whether they're loyal to the mission, loyal to the people around them, whether they're going to put duty first ahead of themselves, whether they're going to perform their duty. When I think of duty, I think of people like General MacArthur, who served, roughly 40 years? I mean, granted, he wasn't always loyal, and that's why he ended up getting fired by Truman. However, he put duty first, and he thought that duty overrode his loyalty to President Truman. Respect. There's a chain of command, and you have to show the appropriate respect for it. Selfless service. And that's why we have literally hundreds of people who have died on a monthly basis in many, many conflicts. That's why we've lost thousands of men and women in Afghanistan and Iraq, because they put themselves on the line for somebody else, because they're willing to make that sacrifice. Their honor. I mean, honor and integrity. To me, those are synonymous. But the way we define integrity is what you do when nobody's looking. Are you willing to stay awake when you're pulling guard duty and you're the only person awake? Are you willing to do what it takes? Are you willing to put yourself behind the eight ball, if you will? And then, the Marines and the Navy have their honor, courage, and commitment, and the Air Force integrity first. So doing what's right first, service before self, and then excellence in all we do. And that's no matter what you do, whether you're getting up, to speak in front of a crowd, or whether that is, keeping in, physical shape, because that's what you're required to do. So what's all that mean? What's it equate to? It equates to airmen, Marines, sailors, and soldiers. It equates to not always people who are getting medals of honor, but it equates to that team mentality in that top picture. And that's why I put it there, and that's why it's up top. Because once they've embodied that same idea, same level of ethics and values, they're going to put everybody else who's standing on that hill ahead of themselves. Yeah, they might be the NCO or they might be the officer, so they have the responsibility of standing out front. But that doesn't mean that they're the best. That doesn't mean that they're the one who comes before everybody else. It just means that they have the responsibility of serving everybody else they're with. So you have people who become loyal, duty-bound, who are going to put their friends, put their coworkers, put their fellow service members ahead of themselves. You're going to have respectful people who are selfless in everything that they do, who are honorable, integrity-filled, and personally courageous. You have people like Salvatore Bunta, who just received the Medal of Honor because he was willing to do what it took and put himself in the line of fire for his fellow soldiers. You have Lieutenant Fox, the Marine on the right there, who, despite the fact that he was overwhelmed by Viet Cong forces, calmly directed everybody around him and ensured that there was minimal loss of human life. You have Captain Crawford down here, who was a special operator in Afghanistan, who put everybody around him ahead of himself. And that's really what we're calling on. And then you have my friend Kyle Turner, who was turned 19 the day before we shipped out to Iraq. And his first checkpoint that he had to man, they took RPG fire and small arms fire, so AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades. And he and the guy next to him were both shot. And he maintained that checkpoint while they evacuated the dead body of the guy standing next to him. And like I said, he was 19 years old. But all of that played into who he became as a person, because he broke down that rodeo riding guy from Northern California that he had been before he joined the Army. And he became private first class Turner when he was awarded the Silver Star. These traits result in team members can't help but be recognized as leaders and heroes because they put the ethics and values of an organization ahead of themselves. They put everything ahead of themselves. So, like I said, a lot of military, mainly because that's what I know. But how does it correlate to being a Christian? How do individuals go from being just individuals, being sinful individuals, to being saved Christians? We need to break down the I. Thankfully, there's no basic training involved with becoming a Christian because we'd have a lot fewer of us. And it just wouldn't produce the results we actually want. We need to break down who we are as an individual, who Neale is, and develop who I should be, and who I should be because of God living in me, not because of who I want to be to impress you guys, but because I want to impress Him. And I know that no matter what I do, it's not enough because it's about His love and His grace. We're saved by His grace, not by whether somebody is a good singer or a good public speaker, not by how much money we have that we can throw at different charities, that we're saved by what God has done for us. While we were still sinners, He loved us enough to save us. Romans 5:8. That's Neale's paraphrase. That's what I like to look at it as. You can more than welcome turn to Romans 5:8 if you want. But it tells us that even while we were still sinners, He loved us enough that He was willing to sacrifice His Son for our sins, that He was willing to save us. We find salvation through our faith, Romans 3:27, that it's not through our actions, it's not through our deeds. Yes, actions are important, but the actions are a result of who we've become and what we've become because of Christ and because of God's love for us. And because of our faith, that's how we found our salvation. We're called by His selfless service to be selfless in our service. That it's not about what, Jim does, and it's not about why he does it, other than if he does that because he's supposed to self-sacrifice as Christ did. He's supposed to put himself forward. We're all supposed to put ourselves forward as that example, as that message of what Christ's love is and what God's love for us is and what that salvation means inside of us. And I got the name wrong. It's Tuckman model, sorry. On the previous slide when I talked about teamwork development, it's the Tuckman model of team development, because we all go through this as we become Christians. This is our Christian basic training. We go through the forming. Initially, when we first start going to church, or when we first become Christians, at least in name, we first go through the idea of, I want somebody to like me. I want to be accepted. I want to look like everybody else, or I want to act like everybody else. Oh, they're praying and they've got their hands folded. I should fold my hands, just like we see our kids doing. Like we had Gabriel over yesterday to play, and all of our girls, automatically we sat down to lunch, and they all reached out and held hands. And he kind of looked at us. No, I want to fold my hands. So we all folded hands instead of holding hands. And that's the kind of that forming we go through. But we go through this forming because we want God to accept us, and we want our people at church to accept us, but not because of who we are inside, but just surface level. And then we go through that initial storming phase where our personal desires, that desire to sleep in, or that desire to hang out with the people that we know we shouldn't be hanging out with, overrides our sense of Christian values, our sense of who we should be as Christians. And you go through that model, and I went through this every day. We go through that struggle of being who we should be versus who we want to be, who God expects us to be, and who we want to be. And we're constantly going through that struggle, or I'm constantly going through that struggle of trying to find who I should be versus who it'd be a lot easier to be. And eventually, at some point, we begin to accept that God's will, i.e. our core values, are going to override my individual values and my desires. And I'm going to start to accept those. Not every day, and yes, I'm going to constantly go back to this. And I'm going to go from the initial performing, which is eventually accepting God's will as our internalized individual beliefs and values. And there are going to be days where somebody cuts you off on the road, or where somebody, wasn't nice to you, or tried your patience, especially if you have kids, and you're going to go back to that storming where you're just like, I just don't want to be a Christian right now. I had a sergeant major who one time got really frustrated. That's the top ranking NCO in the Army. He got really frustrated with me. It's like, Specialist Linge? Yes, Sergeant Major. You're about to make me lose my religion. And there are a lot of times where we come very close to losing our religion because we either don't internalize it enough or we just lose our focus and we go back to the storming. What I'd like for you to do is turn to Romans 12, please. This is the foundation verse or set of verses for this lesson this morning. I'll give you guys a second to get there. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If the gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it's giving, then give generously. If it's to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. This is what I view as our core values. You can go back to Jesus' lesson on, what is the most important command? Love one another. Love your God. But what it tells us as far as how we should treat others, this is what I like to look at. And what does it produce in us? It produces a will that's not our own, to live our lives as a living sacrifice. That's 12:1. If you look at Galatians 2:20, which I know we've looked at a lot here, if you want to turn, you're more than welcome. It tells us to put ourselves behind the cross of Christ, to put His crucifixion in our lives. That we've crucified ourselves for Christ. That it's Christ living in us, not ourselves, not our own will, not our own desire. Once we've done this, we'll see the fruit of the Spirit in everything that we do, and that's the desired result. So when we looked at that previous slide where we had all those heroes of the military, and that desired end result of being a true soldier, sailor, Marine, the true Christian is the one who displays the love, the joy, peace, patience, the kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control that we saw in Christ. Because He was our example. He was our core value at the very heart of it. He was what God threw into a human body and put on this earth so that we could see how we are supposed to live. And that is what He displayed, the fruit of the Spirit. And these traits result in Christians who can't help but be recognized. They're going to be recognized by fellow Christians. They're going to be recognized by non-Christians. And they're going to be recognized by God. And that's all I have for you. Jim, if you wouldn't mind coming up, please.